আসসালামু আলাইকুম and very good evening যুক্তরাজ্য সহ পৃথিবীর যে যেখানে বসে এনটিভি ইউরোপের রেগুলার প্রোগ্রাম কমিউনিটি ম্যাটার্স দেখছেন আপনাদের সবাইকে শুভেচ্ছা সহ স্বাগতম বরাবরের মতো আজকেও আপনাদের সাথে আছি আমি আদনান পাভেল। আপনারা যারা রেগুলারলি কমিউনিটি ম্যাটার্স দেখেন আপনারা জানেন কমিউনিটি ম্যাটার্স আপনাদের অনুষ্ঠান, আপনাদের নিয়ে অনুষ্ঠান। আমরা সবসময় চেষ্টা করি এই অনুষ্ঠানে এমন সব টপিকে কথা বলতে যা কিনা ব্রিটিশ বাংলাদেশি কমিউনিটি বা বাংলাদেশি কমিউনিটির উপর প্রভাব ফেলছে বা অদূর ভবিষ্যতে প্রভাব ফেলতে পারে, আজও তার ব্যতিক্রম নয়। টুডে we'll discuss about a very important topic, which is recent COP27 conference that just happened few days back. We today will have two expert panelists, Dr. Salimul Haq and Katia Hauger, who will discuss in detail about their thought on this important conference. So, if I may start with you, Katia, we know that you from your background, you have been working very closely about climate change and related to matter that impacts plant conservatism and biodiversity. There are many plants that are very vulnerable to this climate change. Could you please talk us through so that our audience can have a better understanding about how climate change can impact the plant conservatism?
Certainly. Well, Adnan, first of all, many thanks for having me on your show today. It's a real honor to be here, and greetings to the whole Bangladeshi community watching. Lovely to meet you all tonight. So I would like to begin by saying that I am a PhD student at Imperial College London. I'm working with Professor Colin Turnbull on discovering the genetic and physiological basis of why some plants are naturally resistant to aphids, which are an important plant pest. I'm now going to zoom out from this small focus topic, which is typical for a PhD project, and talk a little bit about why is climate change bad for plants. When we think of climate change, first thing that comes to mind is increase in temperature all around the world. For a lot of people, we might think, based on our limited experience with working with plants, but plants seem to do better when it's warmer. Like here in the winter in the UK, all the plants are dormant when it's cold. Surely the world becoming warmer must be a good thing for plants, right? Well, think again. Higher temperatures translate into more droughts. So this means higher temperatures, less rain, more drought and heat stress on plants. Another thing that happens with global warming is that habitats change. For example, habitats that used to be forest or meadows become deserts. This is a process called desertification. So the plants that were living in those habitats, that can be wild plants as well as agriculturally important plants, they lose their habitat. They can't survive there anymore. Another problem with drought and heat stress is that plants need more irrigation. This means that we cannot rely on the natural rainfall to keep our crops and wild plants supplied with water. In the case of crops, this means more bringing in water from other sources, such as underground wells, which often have a lot of salt and other minerals dissolved in that water. When that water is applied to fields multiple times per year, what happens is that this salt and minerals builds up in the soil, and this can become toxic for the plants trying to grow there. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the problem of climate change and changing weather patterns. So as well as droughts, another thing that can happen to plants because of climate change is floods. Plants can get too much water, and floods can destroy crops and also impact natural plant environments by flooding the roots and drowning whole forests. Another thing about climate change and weather is that we generally see more extreme weather, hotter summers, colder winters, events like hurricanes, flash floods, just all this extreme stuff. Plants are great survivors, but they sometimes cannot keep up with these rapid changes to their environment, and this can lead to the destruction of habitat and even the extinction of whole species out in the wild. Another thing that happens with climate change is a disruption of seasonal patterns. Now, I live in the countryside here in England in rural Oxfordshire, and I can tell you that over the course of my 33 years, I have seen the spring arrive much earlier. So plants they're getting their whole seasonal patterns messed up by climate change. Suddenly winters are shorter, spring arrives sooner, summer is hotter, it just throws them off. Like, for example, a great example about how seasonal patterns changing can confuse plants is that spring arrives early. We may have a warm period, say in March. The apple blossoms will bloom. Then suddenly they're hit by a cold snap, and that kills off all of those blossoms before they can make a big harvest of fruit in the autumn. So that's an example of how these seasonal patterns impacted by climate change can hurt plants in the wild and domestic plants. Now, climate change can also indirectly hurt plants by impacting their pollinators. Now, for most flowering plants, they need pollinators, which can be insects, mammals, birds, etc., to carry pollen between flowers for their reproduction. Even if a plant is not harmed by the changing climate, the changing climate might lead to its pollinators becoming extinct or much rarer. So this, in a way, can lead to a plant's extinction by preventing it from reproducing naturally. Same thing goes for many economically important plants that rely on pollinators. So that's a little overview of why climate change hurts plants. Thanks for listening, and I'm going to hand things back to
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have Dr. Salimul Haq with us. Dr. Salimul Haq, can you hear me well?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you very much. Dr. Salimul Haq, if I may ask you that during last year, during COP26, you were here in the UK, in Glasgow, and then you were very kind to join my talk show afterwards, and you said we need to be cautiously optimistic about future after joining COP26. What is your impression after joining COP27? We know you were there in COP27. What is your impression? Are you still cautiously optimistic about the future?
Well, I must say I'm less optimistic about the future after COP27 because unfortunately on the big issue, which is reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, we did not achieve very much. We needed to raise the ambition level of all countries, particularly the big emitters. But unfortunately, because of the current situation with respect to energy crisis and so on, the big emitters seem to be going back on their pledges to wean themselves off fossil fuels. But I think that's a temporary phenomenon. It's just a small issue for the next year or two. After that, we will be able to resume our efforts to wean ourselves off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And indeed, many of the big economies are taking actions in that direction, which they should have done 10 years ago, and they wouldn't have been in the crisis they are now. But they are doing it now, better late than never. But on the other hand, speaking on behalf of and on an issue that has been of great concern for the most vulnerable developing countries and the most vulnerable people on the planet, the issue of loss and damage was actually dealt with. We were able to get all countries to agree to establish a new fund to support the victims of human-induced climate change losses and damages, which are now unfortunately happening already. So in a way, that was a somewhat of a good victory for the vulnerable countries, because it was something that the rich, powerful countries had been debating and preventing for many years, while we have been asking for this. But this year we were able to persuade everybody that the time had come to help to establish this fund. Now, the fund doesn't have any money yet. All we've agreed to do is set it up. We will spend the next year looking at options on how to raise money, how to manage the money, and who to give the money to. But we have set up a transitional committee which will start very soon, and hopefully by COP28 we will be able to come up with options and then negotiate them, and then a year from now in COP28 in Dubai we can make it functional, hopefully. So that was one hopeful outcome, particularly for the most vulnerable developing countries.
Thank you very much, You mentioned about the recent energy crisis. We know because of the war between Ukraine and Russia, things have become much more complicated when it comes to renewables energy sources. Do you think in many countries, including in UK, we have seen there is a tendency of going backwards? Many government, they are more interested about exploring their time and resources for coal energy. What do you make of it? Do you feel that they will reconsider, and instead of going backwards, rather they will spend more time and energy for renewables, thinking that this is the future?
I personally feel very optimistic about the future, not because countries are making conscious decisions based on discussions at the Conference of Parties under the Framework Convention, but simply because of the global economy. The way that the renewable energy sector is moving forward, it's a tripod of solar energy, wind energy, and storage of energy, because both solar and wind are intermittent sources. So you need a combination of all three. And as it happens, all three of them are making major technological advances, which make them more efficient and make them cheaper. Renewable energy gets cheaper by the day, unlike fossil fuel energy, which gets more expensive by the day. And so we will very soon cross the threshold, and we are already crossing the threshold, particularly for coal energy, where nobody's going to invest in these anymore, because the renewable energy sector is much, much, much more promising, both in terms of energy production as well as in job creation, green job creation. So, the fossil fuel industry is now going to be dependent on subsidies from the fossil fuel producers for their survival. They simply will not be able to compete. Now, having said that, the fossil fuel industry have a lot of money and they can subsidize themselves for a long time to come. So we're going to have to fight them. It's going to be a big fight. But the fight is not at the cost. The fight is in the economic dimensions of where do the trillions of dollars of investors put their money. And they're not going to put it in fossil fuels anymore, I can assure you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Salim Ul-Haq, before you join, we were talking to Katia Hogard regarding how many plants are vulnerable to climate change. And we know that Bangladesh has been one of the worst affected countries of climate change, although Bangladesh doesn't produce that much of carbon footprint. And this is where probably loss and damage conversation will probably be much more helpful. But in the past, we have seen rich countries making many empty promises and they were unable to fulfill those promises. Do you think this time around they will keep up with their promises? Do you think they will take this matter seriously and then they will do something about it? What is your feelings?
Well, in these global planetary scale problems where we don't have a global government, all we have is 200 countries coming together to agree things, and everything has to be by consensus. It's not a majority rule. It's consensus. Any single country can stop a consensus if it doesn't agree. So we are stuck with that modality, and we have to assume goodwill of all the countries who are coming to negotiate. We have to assume that they are negotiating in good faith, that whatever promises they make, they intend to keep those promises. If they are unable to keep those promises, we give them the benefit of the doubt that they had some problems. They wanted to do it, but they weren't able to do it. They come with excuses saying, we're very sorry, we weren't able to do it, now we want to do more going forward. And they have made those promises again. The fact that they were not able to keep all the promises to the extent that they made them is certainly disappointing, but it is not as if anybody has not done anything. They have done quite a lot. They need to do more. They promise to do more, but they haven't done more. That is what we have to keep pushing for in the global negotiations. But I would say one other thing. The global negotiations is not where the action is. The action is at home. Every country has to make these decisions themselves. They have to make it for themselves, for the benefit of their own citizens. And increasingly, every country is making those decisions. They are seeing that their own country's future depends on tackling climate change, on tackling the energy crisis, on tackling the economic crisis, on
Sure.
tackling the food crisis. All of these are now crises everywhere, and
Sure.
every country has to deal with them. And unfortunately, we are not doing well at all.
Thank
All
you.
countries are doing
Thank
very
you
badly,
very
so
much,
we have
Dr.
to think about.
Thank you, Dr. Salimul Haq. We will have further conversation on this topic. Thank you, Katia Hoggard and Dr. Salimul Haq, for joining us today to talk on this important topic, COP27. Dear viewers, we now will go for a break now. We'll go for a short break. Please do stay with us. Dear viewers, welcome back after a break. Today we are discussing on COP27, and today we have two expert panelists with us. We have Dr. Salimul Haq, who is a very well-known environmental scientist, climate change expert. We also have Katia Hoggard, who is doing her research on plant diversity and plant conservatism at Imperial College. Thank you both of you for joining us today. Before we went for break, we were discussing about the recent development from COP27. Katia, if I come back to you, we know that in the UK, many climate change related events have started happening, as for example, flood and various sort of other related events. How vulnerable the plants of UK in terms of climate change? Are they very vulnerable? What should we do to, as a practical step forward to preserve plant biodiversity?
Well, thank you for the question, Adnan. Before the break, we were talking about what individual countries are doing to fight climate change. And I would say that although it's not perfect, I do feel that the UK is doing a lot to conserve wild plants, to fight climate change, and to make agriculture more sustainable. Certainly talking about the conservation of nature and natural habitats here in the UK is sometimes front page news. There's also a lot of political initiatives aimed at curbing emissions, at protecting habitats, and also at making agriculture more sustainable. I would say that I think more regulations could be put in place to preserve space for nature on farms and also to encourage more organic and wildlife-friendly farming here in the UK. But it's a big and complex issue, and I know that there are a lot of economic factors at play. So I would say that even though the UK is an industrialized and very densely populated country, it may surprise our viewers in other places to know that there's actually a lot of natural habitat here still, and a lot of very traditionally managed habitat out here in rural Britain as well. So I would, as well as the political initiatives for conservation, there are many different charities, academic organizations, and also other types of research and citizen science aimed at understanding the impacts of climate change on the plants here in the UK. What's good about the UK also is that we have very long records documenting which plants were growing in which habitats. We have records kept by, you could say, citizen scientists, as we might call them now, that date back to the 1700s. So in a place like the UK, where nature has always been quite meticulously studied by the locals, we can look at these records and see how climate change, say, starting in the Industrial Revolution and to the present day, has changed habitats. We can look at records of what plant species were growing in a certain part of the UK back in the 1700s, when a person there kept a diary where they recounted when different flowers bloomed in the spring, when the leaves started to change colors, and we can compare that with nowadays and see how the seasons have shifted. And also we can even see if there were species in that habitat that are no longer there, or if new species have moved in to take their place. So I think that the UK's meticulous and long records of wild plants here helps us understand the impact of climate change on the UK. And as far as practical matters go, I'm not sure how much can be done to stop the impacts of climate change on natural habitats here in the UK. Climate change is a global issue, and I think that one of the things we can do, though, is if we have the opportunity to use plants in landscaping and reforestation that have more of a chance of being resilient and adaptable to changing climates, we have to balance this also with making sure to choose wildlife-friendly species that are part of the natural woodland, grassland, hedgerow, and other environments we find here in the UK, so we don't end up introducing a bunch of exotic invasive species just because they're better adapted to the changing climate. So I would say it's about finding a balance in, say, maybe you've heard about the rewilding movement here in the UK. This is a movement to actually take land that was once farmed or developed and to carefully restore it back to the natural habitat it would have been in pre-industrial times. So I would say that I think that more of that should be happening, but we need to make sure to plant native species that are a natural part of the environment that are more adaptable to a changing climate with more extreme summers and winters, and also shifting seasonal patterns. So that would be my suggestion.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Salimul Haq, if I come back to you, previously you emphasized on local action. In order to take local action beside government, the engagement of civil society is also very, very important. Too often we see that when it comes to climate change, important issues like climate change, people think it is very complicated and somehow the message gets distorted. It is important that the people, normal common people, they understand the message and they can take some action from their own perspective. What would be your recommendation to governments and other organizations, those who are working on ground regarding climate change, how they should convey their message to common people so that common people can join this campaign and take some sensible action to tackle climate change? What would be your recommendation, sir?
Thank you very much, Adnan. So I think this is an extremely important issue whose time has come now in a very big way, because the climate change problem is so big and has become so severe that now it's no longer something that can be left to the scientists and the government officials. It is something that everybody needs to be involved in. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Yeah, good. So what we do need is for governments to make public information a very high priority. Starting from schools, young school children need to be taught about this issue, taught about what they can do about it, what everybody can do about it, and also the media like yourselves. You have a big important role to play to tell the public, because often, scientists like myself and Katya, we speak in a very scientific language that doesn't necessarily translate to the public, and you, the media, need to be our interpreters to get the messages to the general public. And the final point I'll make is that I think the most important investment in public information now has to be with young people, because young people now have the issue of their own future being decided by old people, and old people are making a mess of it. And so the young people now need to be given the both the knowledge, but more important than the knowledge, the power to actually change things. Because unless they do that, then unfortunately, we, the older generation, have failed to do what was needed of us. We knew what to do for 30 years. We didn't do enough. We did a little bit, but we didn't do enough. And so the problem is now coming on our shoulders, and we are leaving it behind for our younger generation. And the least we can do is to enable them with knowledge and with capacity to actually do the things that they need to do that we were not able to do. And my feeling when I talk to young people is they are up for the challenge. They are very, very willing to learn, to do, to be activists and to be action-oriented if we can support them and empower them. So this is something that all of us, governments, media, scientists, all of us need to be investing our time and effort in.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Katia, if I come back to you, you use social media to inform people in your network and also common people, those who follow your social media, to convey your scientific finding or to inform people about recent development related to your research. How important it is for the scientists to use a very plain language for the common people, so that the common people, they are well informed and they can take pragmatic, practical action from their perspective, so that we all together can do something sensible and good.
Well, thank you, Adnan. I cannot emphasize more than I can the importance of science communication. I think it's very important to be able to simplify what you're doing in terms of research into something that's meaningful for the average person you might meet in your community or in the wider world. I would like to clarify a little bit, though. I do have a social media presence known as Catch a Plant Scientist, and I don't just write and post about my work. My aim there is more to foster curiosity and appreciation of plants in the wild, in your garden, and in science. I do sometimes talk a little bit about my own research topic, but it's there along with a lot of other exciting and eye-opening facts and stories about plants. So even if you're not interested in aphids, I do recommend checking it out. So I think science communication is very important, and something that I think Imperial College does well is to have a lot of short courses and training, as well as hands-on opportunities to do science communication. For example, some years ago, my supervisor colleagues and I designed an exhibit about plants versus aphids as part of Imperial Festival back in 2018. And that was a great exercise in thinking, how do we explain this research and make it interactive and interesting for members of the public of all ages? So I would say that some ways that scientists can make their research more interesting and engaging for the public is to link their research to a real-world issue and have this real-world issue as an opening hook to whatever they write, talk about, or record. Another tip I would say is to try to eliminate as much jargon as you can. Now, jargon is just the code words that people in science use as shorthand when talking about things. But if you can remove as much of that as possible, that's a great start. Another thing I think that people in science and academia need to remember is that things that are commonplace for us, for example, doing a polymerase chain reaction in the lab, I have to do lots of those. It's as boring as running a dishwasher to me, but to people out in the public, they don't know what that is. But if you can explain it, often it's very interesting and surprising for them. It's, by the way, it's a lab technique for copying and amplifying pieces of DNA. So even just explaining things that seem like basic common knowledge in your field can also be very exciting and curiosity stimulating for the public. So those are a few of my tips about science communication.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Salimul Haq, if I come back to you, recently on this COP27 conference, we have seen China not joining that conference, although we know that when it comes to climate change, it is important that all those major important countries, they are working together. But what is your reaction about that?
I don't think that's correct, Adnan. China was very much there. China is very much part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and China has signed up to the Paris Agreement, which all countries have agreed to. So it's not correct to say that China was not there or not participating. However, the point is that China is now the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, and therefore they have a much bigger responsibility than other countries. They have overtaken the United States, who used to be the biggest emitter in real terms, but is still the biggest emitter if you take cumulative emissions over the last century and a half. The US is still the biggest contributor to the problem, but they're not currently the biggest current contributor. China is. So China and the US are the two countries that between them estimated to roughly account for half of global emissions. So if these two countries don't take action, then all the other 198 countries taking action is not going to be very useful. We need them to take action. They have done so. We must appreciate that the Paris Agreement was achieved in 2015 at the 21st Conference of Parties in Paris, when President Obama was the president of the US, along with President Xi of China. The two countries were the ones who really brought us together,
Sure.
and we achieved the Paris Agreement to keep global temperature below 1.5 degrees.
Sure.
And the rich countries
Thank you.
promised 100
Thank you, Dr. Salimul Haq. Thank you, Katya, and thank you, Dr. Salimul Haq. We'll have further follow-up conversation on this. We need to go for a quick break. Once we come back, we'll discuss this matter further. Dear viewers, we need to go for a quick break. Once we come back, we'll have further conversation on COP27. Thank you. Do stay with us. Dear viewers, welcome back after a short break. Today on Community Matters, we're discussing COP27 that happened very recently. Today we have two expert panelists discussing COP27. We have Dr. Salimul Haq, a very well-known environmental scientist, climate change expert, and we also have Katya Hoggart, who is also doing her research on plant conservatism. Thank you both of you once again. Katya, if I come back to you, during COP27, world leaders, experts, they have discussed various sort of issues related to climate change, their future strategy, future plan. Do you think there has been enough discussion about forestry, plant conservatism and biodiversity during that conference? How optimistic you are?
Okay, well, Adnan, thank you for asking for my opinion on it. First of all, I want to clear the air and say that, unlike Dr. Huck, I was not at COP27 as a guest or a delegate or anything like that. I just read about it through the official website. I also read some kind of scientifically focused journalism about the event, and I also watched some clips of some of the discussions, talks, and also looking around at the event. So I just want to say that I was not there, so if my opinions on it aren't accurate, it's because I didn't have the whole picture. But what I did gain from reading about COP27 and what its themes were, I was very pleased to see that biodiversity, ecosystem restoration, and an emphasis on plant-based food were major topics at COP27. These three topics are very important because they all involve plants. Plants, of course, make up a lot of the biomass of the earth, so conserving biodiversity in effect is also conserving plants, because plants are the base of the food chain. They are the environment around the animals and other species. So if we're protecting biodiversity, that means we are also protecting plants, and that's great news. Also, the talk of ecosystem restoration, well, plants have a key role in that. For example, I know that in sub-Saharan Africa, in order to fight desertification, people in some of those countries are intentionally planting various kinds of native trees to stop the spread of sand dunes. So again, plants are important in ecosystem restoration, but you have to make sure to choose the right plants that are native species that belong there, not introducing invasive species and getting a whole other problem started. I also like the emphasis on plant-based foods too, because as many of us know, the consumption of meat and animal products is a major source of greenhouse gases all around the world. Now, I'm no vegan, I'm more of a gourmet, you could say. I love all the different foods and delicious cuisines from around the world. I have no problem with eating meat and fish, but I also love tofu, seitan, and wheat protein as well. So I think it's great to encourage people to eat a bit less meat, just eat it in moderation. So I think that an emphasis on plant-based food is good for agriculture because it means a shift away from so much animal production, and also good for our health too, because a diet with more plants in it is healthier than one that relies on animal protein for most of your calories. I even heard about a food for climate pavilion. I would have loved to have visited that. It sounds amazing. But something that seemed a little lacking based on my impression of COP27 was that I did not see enough emphasis on the role of biotechnology and plant science in the conservation of plants and making agriculture more sustainable. See, research like mine, its big picture aim is to make agriculturally important plants innately resistant to aphids. Now, what does this mean? This means that you have a plant that an aphid or another insect pest just doesn't want to eat. They'll go feed on some wild plants instead of attacking and wiping out your crops. Since the plant has genes in it that make it resistant to aphids, this means you do not have to use pesticides or other kinds of chemical control to get rid of the aphids on the crops. So I did not see all that much of an emphasis on using, say, genetically edited or genetically modified plants as part of a bigger picture sustainable agriculture strategy. Maybe it was there, but that I did not read about it in any of the sources or videos that I saw. But I think that although it's a somewhat misunderstood technology, it has great potential to make agriculture more eco-friendly in the long run. But back to you, Adnan.
Thank you very much. Dr. Salimul Haq, if I come back to you, you mentioned a number of important things that the common people, citizen, they can do to take as a local action from their capacity to tackle climate change. British Bangladeshi community, as you know, British Bangladeshi community is a very dynamic, very engaging community. Those British Bangladeshi community, those who are watching this program, what would be your suggestion for them as a practical action forward to tackle climate change? What they can do in their house, what they can do in their surroundings to tackle climate change, and how they can help Bangladesh in this important, crucial matter.
Thank you very much, Adnan. I think you've identified an extremely important and potentially very, very positive opportunity here. And my message to the Bangladeshi community in the UK, the British Bangladeshi community, is a twofold message. For the adults, it is for them because I'm sure they all have relatives and people at home that they are in touch with and they feel about. They should learn about climate change, even though it may be a new topic for them. They may not have heard about it when they were studying. It is an important subject. They only need to read the newspapers and just learn more about it and watch programs on television or on YouTube, just to become more aware about it, because it is an important issue for both the UK and Bangladesh, which are the two countries that they have a foot in both these two countries, and climate change is a link between these two. And I do a lot of work between the UK and Bangladesh on the scientific side, on how do we promote science. The second message is for younger generation, particularly the British Bangladeshi younger generation, who are probably more British than they are Bangladeshi. Their parents may have links back to their homeland, but the children may have less of those links themselves. But again, I've been working a lot with the British Bangladeshi community in the UK, and I can assure you that they are very interested in this topic. Climate change is something that all young people are interested in, including British Bangladeshis. And for British Bangladeshi young people, even school children, the fact that their heritage is from Bangladesh, which is a very climate vulnerable country, is a relevant piece of information and knowledge for them to share with their schoolmates and with their teachers and with their their own generation of young people. Because climate change is now a global problem in which both the United Kingdom and Bangladesh have very important individual roles to play, and also can be very important bilateral partners in tackling the problem going forward. Unfortunately, climate change is going to get worse. It's not going to get better in our lifetimes. So we are just starting to tackle this problem and figure out what to do about it. We are doing what we can in Bangladesh. The UK is doing what it can, as we heard from Katya. We need to be joining forces, learning from each other, and helping each other to solve this global problem of climate change, which every country is going to have to face. But I think the UK and Bangladesh are in good positions to take a lead in sharing our knowledge and then sharing it with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Katya, what is your final comment? As you mentioned before, that although you haven't joined in person physically at COP27, however, you have been following this issue very passionately. You have been reading on important outcome of this important conference very keenly. What would be your final comment for our viewers?
Well, my final comment for the viewers has to do with the importance of delicious fruits, vegetables, and herbs in your culture. So I would like to give some words of encouragement to folks here in the British Bangladeshi community and the Bangladeshi diaspora all over the world. And I'd like to encourage people to try and grow some of their own food. Now, you might be thinking, well, don't you need a whole farm to do that? But I would like to assure you that anybody, even if you just have a window box or a small urban garden, you can grow some of your own food. And by growing some of your own food, especially if it's culturally important, say herbs, fruits, and vegetables for your traditional dishes, this also helps cut down on food miles so you don't have to buy them from an import shop. So some tips I'd like to give to would-be gardeners out there is that there are more species from tropical climates that you can grow in the Europe and UK than you might think. The key to growing some of your favorites from your home country is to think of plants that may have been perennials that lived many years back in the tropics. Think of them as summer annuals here. I'd like to give an example, and forgive me if I mess up the pronunciation of the word, but say there's a plant that I know is quite popular in Bangladesh called Malabar spinach, pui shak, I believe it's called in Bangla. So this plant actually grows really well in the summer here in the UK. You can grow it on a sunny wall and it makes tons of leaves. You can grow it in a small container in a small space, and you can get lots of fresh, delicious leaves for your stews and salads. Also, if you would like to try growing more unusual varieties of fruits and veg, or if you'd like to try and see if you can find fruits, veg, and herbs from Bangladesh or from South Asia, I recommend checking some of the specialty seed catalogs here in the UK, because they are really becoming more multicultural in the offering of plant species in their catalogs. It's not just traditional British veg, it's things from all over the world. And I'd really like to encourage people who would like to have a closer connection with nature, plants, and where food comes from to give gardening a go, even if it's just growing your favorite herbs in a window box. So yes, certainly gardening and growing my own food is something that's been part of my entire life and the main inspiration for why I decided to become a plant scientist.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Salimul Haq, what would be your final message? But before I request for your final message, business leader, you conveyed your message for the young people and British Bangladeshi diaspora in the UK. What would be your message for the business leaders? Can economic emancipation and climate change, tackling climate change, can these two important matters, can they go simultaneously? What would be your message for the business leader before I request for your final comment?
Thank you very much, Adnan. You made a very good point about a very important sector. I feel now that actually more important than political leaders are business leaders. The business people are the ones who will have to make decisions about where to invest, and they are talking about trillions of dollars. You know, they have investments in the many trillions of dollars, not the few tens of billions that government budgets have. And so they can make decisions for investing in a better world. And by that I mean two things. Firstly, investing in non-fossil energy production, renewable energy. That is the future that we have to go to as quickly as possible. We are moving in the right direction. We're not moving fast enough. The second one is in making our systems, agriculture systems in particular, more resilient, as Katya has said. In every country, we can build a more resilient food system, agriculture system, and that can actually be good business for the business companies that are involved in food production,
sir.
in
Thank
food
you. Sir,
distribution,
what is
and
your
in
final comment in
consumption.
10 seconds? We are almost at the very end of our program. What is your final comment in 10 seconds, please?
So my final comment is, please, everybody who's listening, try to follow what's happening on climate change. It is a very important subject, and I would suggest that you will need to know more about it. So please
Thank you.
raise your level of
Thank you.
understanding.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Katia Hogarth, and thank you, Dr. Salimul Haq. Dear viewers, today we discussed a very important topic, COP27, particularly for British Bangladeshi community, those who are living in the UK, in Europe, also those who are watching from Bangladesh. It is a very, very important topic. Climate change is affecting the way we live. Climate change is affecting our day-to-day life. We must take some pragmatic action. We shouldn't just rely on government and other agencies to take action. We must do something from our perspective as well. We must be responsible how we do something about climate change. We need to act in a responsible and reasonable way, and this is a very, very important topic. And our responsibility. আপনারা যে যেখানে থাকবেন, ভালো থাকবেন, সুস্থ থাকবেন, এই ইম্পর্টেন্ট টপিকে আপনারা আরও জানবেন এবং এই ব্যাপারে আপনারা প্র্যাকটিক্যাল পদক্ষেপ নেওয়ার চেষ্টা করবেন। আপনারা যে যেখানে থাকুন, ভালো থাকুন, সেই পর্যন্ত থ্যাংক ইউ অ্যান্ড টেক কেয়ার।